Good afternoon, and welcome to the April 2016 edition in our Supply Chain Management webinar series. A few housekeeping things before we get started. If you have a question during the webinar on your control panel, just toggle the raise your hand. If I can, I'll answer the question as I'm going along. If not, stick around at the end of the webinar and I'll stay online answering questions as long as you're there. Also, this webinar, along with our archive of webinars from the past few years, are available for your viewing on our website webinar page. Okay, well, let's get started today. We're going to be talking about, in an MRP environment, maintaining valid priorities. MRP is meant to be a dynamic process. It consists of activities that are designed to maintain valid priorities and due dates for required materials, whether they be raw materials, components, purchased items, subassemblies, finished goods. MRP is structured to keep those ever-changing priorities and due dates in sync with each other. So let's take a look at what we're going to go over today. And bear with me, it seems like we are having a small problem here. All right, folks, it looks like the video portion of the webinar is not advancing. There it goes. All right, it just took a while. It's a beautiful spring Friday. I'm sure it wants to be outside on a long weekend just like the rest of us. So what we're going to look at are the factors affecting the material plan, then how MRP responds to those changes, and we're going to wind up with looking at MRP action messages and how to use them. So let's get started. All right, things that can change the material requirements plan, priority plan. First is we get new orders from customers. This is a really good thing because without new orders, we'd be out of business. But every time we get a new order for our product, it changes the current material requirements plan. The second thing that can change the material requirements plan, we receive material into stock, whether it's coming from our vendors, whether it's coming from production, whether it was a material that was in a holding location that MRP couldn't see because it hadn't passed its final QC, or it was in a material review board. Whenever we have a receipt to stock, it changes the material requirements plan. The next thing, change orders. Now, we all know they happen. You get a customer that places an order. He wants 1,000 of this widget. He wants them delivered on June 1st. Everything is fine. You get the order, you put it into your system, you plan how you're going to meet that requirement, and then 2 weeks after the customer placed the order, they come back and give you a change order saying, oh, we want to break that into multiple shipments. We want 100 of them the first week in May, we want 100 the second week in May, and then the 1st of June, we want 300 pieces. Every one of those changes that the customer just asked for change the priority plan that material requirements planning has calculated. The next thing that affects the priority plan, orders come in late. You know, the vendor that promised you that they would have it to your dock by 8 o'clock in the morning, Friday, April 22nd, 8 o'clock came and went, and you get a phone call from them and they say, oh, we're sorry, we had a problem in production. We'll get it to you by Tuesday the 26th. Well, that late order whether it came from a vendor or whether it came from our own manufacturing process. A job in a particular work center is not running to the standard. It's running late. They're having problems with it because of something. That late delivery affects the priority plan of everything around it. The next thing, and I know none of you ever have these happen, inventory adjustments. You know, you do a cycle count, there's supposed to be 1,000 in the box and there's only 642. And you have to do an inventory adjustment and all of a sudden, boom, you got a requirement for 300 pieces that wasn't there the day before. Inventory adjustments, whether done by cycle counting or any other thing that can cause us to do adjustments for inventory, such as QC just found out that a supply of material that they had passed and allowed to go into inventory, there is a defect with it, so they come back and say, oh, guess what? We're pulling all of them back out of inventory. Inventory adjustments change the material requirements plan. And last but not least, our friends in engineering. You know, you've been running this particular product for years and you've got all your inventory fine-tuned to where it flows very rapidly through your process and your inventory levels are low, your inventory turns are high, you've got everything nailed down, and then engineering comes along and says, oh, guess what? We have to pull this particular component out because we found out that it is causing a safety issue when it gets to the user. So we need to pull them out immediately and replace them with something else. Every one of these activities that are on the screen right now change your material requirements plan. And there are others. I'm sure we can all think of something that's not on the screen. But this is what MRP is designed to deal with. Remember, MRP is a dynamic process. It doesn't say the plan that we started with at 8 o'clock Monday morning is going to be valid at 8:01 Monday morning. It knows things are going to change. So those are the factors that can affect the material plan. Now, let's look at how MRP responds to these changes. All the while these changes are going on, MRP and our files are just sucking in all this information from inventory, from scheduling, from the shop, from vendors, from customers, from engineering. All of these changes are being made to the records that MRP uses, the inventory record, the bills of material, the open order files, whether it's purchase order or manufacturing order, the customer order file. All of these files are being changed. MRP's response, nothing happens. Not a single thing happens because of those changes. Nothing changes also. You see, MRP is run periodically, and until you run the next MRP explosion, whether it be a net change or a total regen, all of those changes that happened in all of those different areas, MRP doesn't take them into consideration until you run the next MRP. And this brings up an interesting point. If you have a product that has only one raw material, you run it continuously 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Basically, you only have to do your MRP explosion once a year because it's running continuously. You're not increasing it. You're not decreasing it. It's only got one component. We don't live in that environment, at least not most of us. If you're in an environment where things change by the second, what you'll find yourself doing is you'll set an MRP up to run like most of my clients do. Kicks it off at midnight and takes as ever long as it needs to run the MRP explosion. So that when the planners and the shop floor people and the buyers all walk in starting around 7:30 or so, grab their cup of coffee, get to their terminals by 8 o'clock, they have a new priority plan. There are some of my customers that literally will run an MRP explosion at lunchtime. Some of them will run an MRP explosion 3 times a day. It really is driven by how dynamic the changes are in your product and how important it is to have the latest, greatest priority plan. Now, there is a caveat to be aware of here. If you are running MRP explosions multiple times a day, what you introduce there or have the potential to introduce is system nervousness. The poor guy out in production, he starts running his jobs at 8 o'clock in the morning, and at 10 o'clock you send him a new priority plan that says, oh, you know the job you're running, take it off and run something else. That system nervousness can cause problems of its own, which is why most companies run MRP once a day. Or at the very most, they'll do an intermediate MRP explosion during the day to just capture the things that have changed on certain items. That's called a net change MRP explosion. It only looks at the things that have changed since the last MRP explosion. Okay, so that's the factors that affect the plan and then how MRP responds to them. Now let's look at the action messages that MRP creates. The action messages, there's 4 different types. The first one, MRP created all of these planned orders, whether they be purchase orders or manufacturing orders, to meet the demand for all of the raw materials, the components, the subassemblies, and the finished goods that we need to meet customer demand. So one of the most frequent action messages you'll get from MRP is, hey, I created this order, you need to release it today, or you need to release it this week in order for it to get out in production or get to the vendor so they have sufficient time to either deliver it to us or build the product before it is needed. So, action message, release a planned order. The next type of action message that you get, take an order that's out there, whether it's a purchase order or a manufacturing order, and expedite the delivery of it. It was scheduled to be done by the 29th in our work center number 4, which is straight and cut operations. Now we need it done by the 26th. So you've got a couple days to go out there and see if you can reschedule that order. Now, interestingly enough, MRP is working kind of like in a vacuum here. When it tells you to reschedule that order from the 29th to the 26th, it is assuming that you have all the material and that you have the capacity available to do that. These type things are what drive planners crazy when they see an expedite an open order, because now they got to see if they can move other things out of the way so that they can get the material and the capacity available to do this expedite that MRP is recommending. The third type of action message that MRP sends out. MRP says, hey, delay an order or a scheduled receipt. In other words, slow it down. If you've got this material scheduled to come in from your vendor on Monday, May the 9th, it'll tell you, oh, we don't need that now because something else has changed in the priority plan. We need it actually May the 31st, which is a few weeks later. So go out and tell the vendor, send them a change order, say, hey, we're delaying that scheduled receipt. The last one, cancel an open order, whether it be a purchase order or a manufacturing order. This one is always problematic. It's talking about an order. Let's talk about a manufacturing order. You put it into production. We have expended material, labor, and overhead on that particular order. Now MRP is telling you to cancel it. If this is a job shop environment where you were making it just for a customer, you can't use it anyplace else, then what you wind up doing there is having to write off all of that expense, that material, labor, and overhead. However, if it is a make-to-stock item that you have other demand for from other customers, you may be able to continue making it so that you don't lose the material, labor, and overhead you've already put into it. If you decide to do that, what you wind up having is excess inventory in excess of your current demand. And those typically judgment calls about whether it is more cost effective to cancel and eat the charge for the stuff that we've already done, or continue manufacturing it and eat the additional carrying costs that you'll have because you have more inventory than you actually need. These action messages really form the heart and soul of what makes MRP so effective at being able to maintain priorities. Because you see, the action messages give you, the planner or the buyer, the ability. You don't have to act on every one of them. And in fact, I would propose to you that you'll never be able to act on all of them. You'll filter out the ones that are ridiculous, like move it from starting at 10 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock in the morning if you're doing hourly time buckets. You know you can't do that, so you just ignore things like that. But those MRP action messages are the things, the tools that we use to keep that priority plan valid in an ever-changing environment. So what we've looked at are the factors that affect that material plan, how frequently you should run your MRP explosion to take into account those changes, and then the types of action messages and how you use them to maintain valid priorities in an ever-changing world.